Our next panel, we've got a few changes and substitutions in the upcoming panel, so I hope I get this right. Nadia Steinzor, Eastern Program Coordinator, Earthworks Oil and Gas Accountability Projects. Adrian Kuzminski, Moderator, Sustainable Otsego. Bette J. People for a Healthy Environment. And James Bacon, Attorney, Croton Watershed Clean Water Coalition. Let me just observe, I am going to ask everybody to try and stick to the 5-minute time limit. We just completed our 8th panel. We have 7 more to go. So in fairness to those remaining, please, if you can, keep your comments within the time limits that everyone was given. Thank you. Whoever wants to start, it's up to you.
Hi, I'm Nadia Steinzor with Earthworks Oil and Gas Accountability Project, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today, maybe this evening, and for sticking with us. Founded in 1988, Earthworks is a nonprofit organization that works nationally to support communities and protect them from the impacts of irresponsible mineral and energy development. And we do so through policy and regulatory reform. So we're very interested in the New York regulations and all the other regulatory processes going on around the country around this issue. We will be submitting extensive technical comments on a variety of issues in the regulations, so I'll just touch on a few today. And many thanks to all of you also for calling out the DEC and this rulemaking process clearly and calling on an extended comment period to allow time to integrate the health impacts analysis. You're clearly far from alone in this request, and the rulemaking process is clearly broken. It certainly is not easy to develop regulations to adequately address gas development on a scale and of a type that New York has never seen before. But that is why the state's regulations must be based on a thorough analysis of all possible risks and the strongest effort to prevent them, as well as evidence from other states. The DEC has stated that the final regulations will indeed reflect findings from the health analysis conducted by the DOH. This should, on the face of it, be reassuring, but it's actually quite concerning because this means that the draft regulations before us that we're asked to comment on by tomorrow must be viewed as incomplete. They can simply not be fully analyzed with regard to their effectiveness. Yet the health impacts of gas development are directly related to core regulatory aspects such as setbacks, chemical use, emissions controls, and waste disposal, making their omission here extremely glaring. Last year, Earthworks conducted a health survey and air and water testing project throughout Pennsylvania. Our results are captured in the report Gas Patch Roulette, as well as a research paper that has now been peer-reviewed and accepted for publication. In sum, our analysis showed that contaminants known to be associated with oil and gas development are present in air and water in many locations where the development is occurring. Members of households located closer than 1,500 feet to gas facilities have statistically significant higher rates of several symptoms, such as throat irritation, skin rashes, headaches, and nosebleeds, than those at longer distances. Health symptoms reported at participating households closely matched the scientifically established effects of exposure to chemicals that were detected in the air and water at those same households where the symptoms were reported. With these findings in mind, we are especially alarmed at the paltry setbacks in the draft regulations. There is no established scientific basis for thinking that a 500-foot buffer would offer sufficient protection for water resources, and the DEC has not provided one. There are, however, recent studies and fracturing analyses that imply that a setback of at least 3,000 feet from a primary aquifer, private water well, or any water resource is a much more cautionary and protective course to take. In addition, DEC apparently has not taken into account recent air monitoring studies in which polluting and harmful chemicals have been detected near gas operations. The DEC has in fact neglected to develop any setback requirements for homes and public buildings that are based on air emission considerations, and they must do so. We also continue to call on DEC to prohibit the use of toxic chemicals in hydraulic fracturing that are scientifically established to have serious human and animal carcinogenic, mutagenic, and other health effects that you heard about on a previous panel. Earthworks and many other groups have continually, throughout this process in the last few years, called for that aspect to be dealt with, and the DEC has not. It is a fact of the oil and gas industry that even routine operations can pose environmental and human health threats, and problems such as accidents, spills, and casing failures inevitably occur. This fact makes the industry's drumbeat of denial around both health impacts and accidents and other issues that happen even more astounding. But it is also the reason why even the strongest regulations will not be effective if the agency responsible for implementation and enforcement is not up to the task. And I'd like to mention another research report that Earthworks just issued. In 2011 and 12, we investigated, based on state data in 6 states, the oversight and enforcement capacity of oil and gas regulatory agencies. The resulting report, Breaking All the Rules, details that we have a nationwide crisis in oil and gas oversight. Again, this was based on state data and combing through state violations databases and inspection reports. Our report on New York showed that more than 75% of currently active oil and gas wells in the state go uninspected each year. The rate of inspections has dropped. Few violators are penalized. Penalties are far too low to deter violations, and in some ways, worst of all, data on violations are not publicly available. Without the basic elements of a good oversight and enforcement program, DEC cannot realistically assure citizens that impacts to the environment and human health will actually be addressed should drilling and infrastructure expand. Until the administration can guarantee that even more complex gas development activities would be overseen more effectively than is the case with the state's limited and mostly conventional current industry, permitting for shale gas development should not be allowed to go forward. Finally, as Earthworks, our conservation partners, and members of the public have stated many times before, it is critical that the DEC provide that if waste generated by the oil and gas industry meet the definition of hazardous waste in the state's ECL, they be managed as such. The Assembly has wisely recognized this by passing legislation to end the special exemption that exists solely for the oil and gas industry, and it is time for the administration and the DEC to step up. I'll close in saying that DEC's rationale in the regulations that it need not close the loophole because it exists in US law is emblematic of its approach to these regulations. It implies that weak regulation on the federal level or in other states renders acceptable equally weak regulation in New York State, a position that is unbefitting for an agency charged with protecting New York's environment and citizens. These regulations are far from done, and we must see improvements. Thank you for your time and attention to these critical concerns.
Thank you.
It's been a long day. Thanks to this committee, or I guess it's a collection of committees, for sponsoring this hearing. I'm glad to see several of you still here. I guess it shows that politicians can really work hard, put in a long day. My name is Adrian Kuzminski. I'm the moderator of Sustainable Otsego. We are a social network of several hundred subscribers in the Cooperstown, New York area. And we have been concerned about the implications of fracking for natural gas, the whole process, particularly in our region, but in general as well. I'll try to be brief. The climate change, I'm going to talk about something that's been touched on somewhat, which is the climate change issue that really hasn't been focused on very much today.
Could you try push that button on the bottom? Yeah, see if that works.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I turned it off,
Okay,
sorry.
there you go.
The climate change section of the DEC website governing New York State policy on greenhouse gases reads as follows, quote, "To help minimize risks from climate change, New York State has set 2 goals: reduce emissions of heat-trapping greenhouse gases by 80% from 1990 levels by the year 2050, and improve resilience to climate change in all the state's communities," end quote. As you've heard today already, one of the most powerful and largely overlooked greenhouse gases is methane. Although its half-life in the atmosphere is less than CO2, it is 25 to 100 times more potent, depending on which time frame you're measuring. Massive methane emissions from unconventional gas production conducted over just a few decades could be catastrophic. So-called fugitive methane emissions result from all phases of natural gas production. From the fracking process itself, to the wellhead, to compressors, to the pipeline system with leaky seams, valves, etc. Peer-reviewed research on this subject has been carried out by Professor Robert Howarth and associates at Cornell University. It shows that these fugitive emissions are very serious contributors to global warming, even if they constitute a very small percentage of the total of the gas moving through the system. In a perfect world, methane seepage might be eliminated, but in a real world subject to entropy and human error, continued significant emissions must be anticipated, given the imperfect state of the art of current technology, as, for example, Lou Alstat, retired Executive Vice President of Mobile, testified earlier today. Howarth's latest paper, Methane Emissions from Natural Gas Systems, is appended to these comments. Howarth and his associates are not alone. I have submitted more materials, including a summary section from a draft of a leak detection study carried out by the U.S. Department of Transportation, Pipeline, and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration by Dr. David Shaw et al., released on September 28, 2012. Shaw and Associates document significant leakage from gas pipelines and note an almost total lack of industry guidelines for monitoring leaks. HVHF, or fracking, should not be allowed to go forward in New York State in the face of likely methane emissions and in the absence of significant controls over or even monitoring of emissions. This problem is increasingly recognized. New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman has recently filed an intent to sue the EPA for violating the Clear Air Act by failing to address methane emissions from the oil and gas industry. Schneiderman points out that, quote, regulators have failed to require the industry to use available and cost-effective measures to control these emissions, end quote. The New York State Attorney General's complaint applies equally to the DEC. Nowhere do the proposed DEC regulations explicitly take into account the actual impacts of methane released from natural gas production as a greenhouse gas. A press release from the Attorney General's office is appended to these comments. The proposed regulations, as written, will allow large-scale fracking in New York State with almost entirely unregulated methane emissions. No method is indicated by which methane emissions throughout the production cycle can be monitored or mitigated. There is no discussion of what kind of standards, if any, might be required for an emission-free production system. These omissions place these regulations in stark contrast to established New York State policies calling for urgent reductions in greenhouse gases. The climate change risk posed by methane emissions should not be understated. The worst case scenario is that methane emissions from fracking, not only in New York State, but elsewhere globally, could push the planet beyond the point of no return into runaway global warming. This is not a certainty, but neither can this outcome be dismissed. It is a real risk, not the kind of risk that we should be running. Basically, we're playing Russian roulette here. The assumption often made that the only alternative to natural gas is oil, as we've just heard, is oil or coal, that natural gas is the only alternative to oil or coal. This is a mistaken and dangerously misleading assumption. If these studies are correct, New York State should be avoiding dependence on natural gas and other fossil fuels and prioritizing the development of renewable energy sources as quickly and fully as possible as a matter of public policy. Banning this unsafe technology and imposing an indefinite moratorium on unconventional natural gas development in New York State would send a powerful message that New York State is serious about phasing out fossil fuels. The model here is Germany, among other countries, with its impressive commitment to doing just that. The costs and limitations of renewables are well known, but the sooner these issues are addressed with maximum funding, the better off we will all be. In the meantime, money invested in gas and other renewables only puts us further in the hole. In conclusion, the proposed DEC regulations are entirely inadequate, if not scandalous, with regard to the issue of methane emissions. Legally and ethically, the only course for the DEC is fully to take into account the issue of methane and other greenhouse gas emissions as well as the lack of sufficient mitigating measures to deal with the challenge. Insofar as the goal of New York State is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, then the introduction of unconventional gas drilling into New York State is inconsistent with that goal and should not be permitted. And just one last thought. It seems that we have, one of the things I think that's been demonstrated by the discussion today is that we have sort of reached a point of no return as far as there are no easy choices anymore. We're talking about very serious kinds of trade-offs. If we want to keep our current consumptive lifestyle going, we are now doing so at the expense of destroying, pieces of the planet. And this is a real problem. So there are no easy solutions. Natural gas is not a panacea. It's another fossil fuel as bad as the rest of them. Which isn't to say that alternatives either are going to solve our problem. We have some tough choices in front of us. At the moment, we're burning the furniture to keep warm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is James Bacon. I'm the attorney representing the Croton Watershed Clean Water Coalition and certain residents in the southern tier. I wanted to thank the committee for holding this very important public hearing today, and also for many of its insightful comments and questions to the previous panels. I find it very disturbing that DEC decided not to come here, and I think they would have learned something from the questions, and also the public would have learned something from their responses to the committee's questions. I would hope that in the future that the committee suggest or consider using its subpoena power to require DEC to come in and to have it answer your questions. All right, so we are deeply concerned with DEC's response to comment 4232 in its assessment of public comment on the draft regulations for high volume hydraulic fracturing, or HVHF. Response 4232 indicates DEC will interpret the law of capture to include non-migratory gas, thereby condoning subsurface trespass and the taking of private property. As background, New York follows the law of capture, which is that a migratory substance, such as oil or gas, is not owned until a landowner drills and gains possession of it. The state's oil and gas regulations assume that all gas is migratory. Therefore, DEC requires spacing units dedicating land to one driller so that multiple wells will not depressurize underground pools and cause waste. This process is also called unitization. Any landowner refusing to be unitized will be forced into a spacing unit by compulsory integration to prevent pool depressurization from additional drilling. Draining the migratory gas from beneath properties in the spacing unit is not trespass because the well bore never invades other properties and the draining process causes no harm. While DEC defines all natural gas as migratory, the oil and gas industry distinguishes between conventional and unconventional gas based upon geology and the mining technique. The industry defines HVHF as an unconventional technique that extracts unconventional gas. A deep vertical well is drilled, and then the well bore is directed horizontally into a thin layer of source rock, such as the Marcellus, Utica, or Trenton Black River shale. Boring is followed by high-pressure fracturing of the shale's minute pores to extract the gas. To protect homeowners' rights, DEC must update its regulations to define conventional gas as migratory gas extracted from pools without artificial stimuli, and define unconventional gas as non-migratory gas trapped in an impermeable sediment and extracted by unconventional means such as hydrofracturing, acidization, or pressurization. Significantly, DEC's 4232 response indicates it will not distinguish between conventional and unconventional gas, and thus will expand the law of capture to grant a driller ownership of all non-migratory gas beneath all properties in a spacing unit. Therefore, for the first time in New York, compulsory integration would render homeowners powerless to protect their property from well bores invading their subsurface, opening fissures beneath it, and injecting hazardous materials into it and taking their non-migratory minerals. That type of property invasion is permitted in some western states, such as North Dakota, because that state's oil and gas policy subordinates individual rights to the industry, and its courts hold that compulsory integration is a proper exercise of the state's police power that supersedes the law of trespass. By contrast, our state's oil and gas policy protects individual rights. It states that the production of oil and gas must be regulated in a manner whereby, quote, the rights of all persons, including landowners and the general public, may be fully protected, end quote. However, if DEC's policy in response 4232 is not revised, and I included the comment and a response in my copy to the committee, individual rights will suffer permanent harm. Not only will compulsory integration subject landowners to subsurface trespass, the disposal of hazardous frac fluids beneath their lands will prevent those homeowners from obtaining mortgages or refinancing and will taint the marketability of their title. As the work of Greg May, who's I think the Vice President of Lending in Tompkins County, has shown time and time again. The industrial use of a homeowner's property for HVHF would also violate the typical homeowner's residential use only mortgage restriction. DEC can prevent that permanent damage to the homeowner by defining conventional gas as migratory, defining unconventional gas as non-migratory, and by limiting the establishment of spacing units for the drilling and extraction of migratory gas only. That better reflects legislative purpose for unitization and its historical application in New York. If DEC refuses to do so, we request that the legislature adopt definitions for conventional and unconventional gas and limit unitization in order to prevent DEC from skewering the state's oil and gas policy and trampling individual rights. Compulsory integration should not be expanded to upend New York's law of trespass and take from a homeowner his most significant investment. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to begin by saying those of you who on the committee who are still here, God bless you. And no matter what you do from now on, you're going to heaven. So not to worry, rob a bank, do whatever you want.
Not according to some other people.
Yeah. Besides thanking you for this, I particularly want to thank the Assembly's courage and foresight in passing Bill 10234. And this bill called for a genuine, valid health impact assessment, a real one on the model recommended by the Center for Disease Control. It's quite detailed, but one of the things included in that is, I'll read it to you, the School of Public Health, and we're talking about not the Department of Health, but a School of Public Health within the New York State University system. The School of Public Health conducting such assessment shall conduct a minimum of 2 public hearings regarding the findings of the draft health impact assessment, okay? Regarding the findings of the draft, and allow the public at least 180 days for the public to submit comments. Wisely, you asked that we get a healthy, full-course meal. We've been given a marshmallow to live on. Okay, I'd like to clarify that although I belong to the People for a Healthy Environment, as is stated on the schedule, I am not representing them. I'm representing one of the people who is a target. I don't like it. I live in a target county, and I don't have a hell of a lot to say about it, unfortunately. I'll get back to that in a minute. Okay, yesterday's rally was amazing, but one thing I hated about it is that I felt like me being an environmentalist but not a member of a cult, I felt that it was really bad that I was there and going by me were farmers, very sincere farmers. I didn't like the fact that we were perceived as enemies. We're not enemies. We're on the same side of the issue. I'm not a farmer, but I'm a landowner, and I don't want to live in a state where farms aren't viable. What I wanted to do, Mr. Furman would be someone I'd like to do this. I wanted to invite a couple farmers to come have a beer. Get out of that rally and come have a beer with me. because I want to talk to each other. We are both on the same side, okay? And I think it's a tragedy, and I don't know what public policies will address it, but it's a tragedy that farmers in New York State have to be broke. I will voluntarily pay more taxes if it will help them survive. I will voluntarily pay more taxes so that the good, hardworking farmers of New York State can thrive without being put at risk for their health, the health of their animals, their property values, the danger of losing their mortgages, the danger of losing their insurance. That is not acceptable. We are not enemies. We face a common enemy. And that enemy is a government from the top down of our country run by corporations, and the biggest one now being the fuel industries that are running the country, okay? This was an interesting comment from a leader of a landowners coalition. He said, we cannot get along without a top-notch lawyer and a really tight land lease because they will cheat us any way they can. Except he didn't use the word cheat. I can't say the one he used. What's going on here? Well, for one thing, if we hire someone to take care of our child, or if we want a teacher in the school, we want a background check. If we do a background check of this industry, they'll fail it, they'll flunk it, okay? We cannot regulate. I respect those who say this regulation needs to be changed or we need more time. Why do you bother to regulate companies that have already ignored all previous regulations? What's the point? I'd use an example. If you had a babysitter that you were helpful with, you were happy, you trusted them, then you had to go someplace really important and your babysitter canceled. So you get a babysitter in that you really don't know, but you're kind of desperate. Then later you find out that that babysitter left your sleeping children alone for an hour and left and met her boyfriend. And you find this out. Let's see what you can do. You can say, this is not good, I'm going to make up some more rules for you to babysit. Or you can say, I'll give you a moratorium, you can't babysit for 2 weeks. Or you can report her for endangering the welfare of a child. And if this happens, should she get a fine or should she get jail time? I would do the latter. Companies have not responded to fines. They are endangering the welfare of children and a lot of other people. The only appropriate response is to ban this activity altogether. And if anyone cares to indulge in it, it shouldn't be in the regulatory system. It is in the criminal system. It should be criminalized. Okay? Okay. We all, you know, in terms of sitting down for a beer with this farmer, I think we'd have a lot more in common than our differences. We care about our families, we care about our children, we care about our homes, we care about our communities, we care about our rights as a citizen in a democracy, if we have any left. We care about jobs. I care about jobs. But I don't want jobs that are 7 times more dangerous, have more fatalities than any other industry. Okay? If the choice were here, I found out something really interesting a couple days ago that I didn't know about the history of my own territory. I learned that in Big Flats, New York, and Elmira, New York, during the 1800s, there was quite a tobacco industry thriving. Okay? Not there anymore. But if this were the choice, if the tobacco industry said, look, we really like the southern tier, you need money and you need jobs, we'd like to come in. Would we let it? Or would there be a moral issue here? Would jobs be successfully traded for 430,000 lives a year? Would that be a good trade-off? I don't think so.
Bette, I need to ask if you can please wrap it up. You're kind of way beyond the time.
I will.
Thank you.
I will try to do that. I would like to call attention to the Guthrie report. And it is, when we talk about health impact, the Guthrie report goes into every possible type of health impact that has come in Bradford County, okay? Violence, increase in violence, emergency vehicles not getting to the scene of accidents, drug use, especially bath salts, sexually transmitted diseases. And one that's not mentioned in the regulations is prostitution. My little town, I've lived there for 42 years, I never heard of such a thing. In the past year, there have been 2 prostitution rings broken up. Now, I know they talk about spin-off industries, but I don't think this is what they meant. Okay, why do I do this? I have friends who say to you, you're gonna lose anyway. Why are you devoting, I'm a retired person, I should be having fun. I devote my full-time life to this. Why do I do it? Because if I don't, even if I lose, I have to live with my conscience. And I'm sorry, I have like 2 more minutes? Please, somebody else.
A little quicker if you could, please.
Somebody else can. Okay. I have a list here, and I brought 100 spare copies if anyone is interested. It's all factual, and it's some miracles. It's about some miracles. It's about the most serious, close to devastating explosions that have all happened in the last year. One in Woodhull, New York, evacuation of people all people within a 2-mile radius because of a gas line explosion. My son is a reporter, he was covering it. It's not fun to watch people trembling because they can't go back to their homes. Most recently, West Virginia. 4 homes burned up, 5 severely damaged, 4 lanes of a highway melted. The grace of God and a miracle, no one was killed. No one in those homes, people were home. They were at work or one guy had just left to go hunting. The children were all in school and they were kept in school after the explosion. They weren't allowed to go home. It didn't hit a nearby nursing home. This is a miracle, okay? And morally, I guess I believe in miracles, but I can't take the risk of this. Ban this and criminalize it and sleep at night.
Thank you very much. Mr. Godfrey.
Yeah, and let me just apologize in advance because I do have to leave, but I've already been blessed, so I guess I'm covered. But I have a question for Mr. Bacon, and this is maybe the one area in this topic where those of us who are lawyers have an advantage over the scientists and the engineers. The compulsory integration legislation. First of all, can you tell me how long ago it originated in New York? I mean, I've heard discussion of it being amended in '05. Is that when it was enacted, or?
No, I think it had been in place since 1963 because the traditional idea of pools of oil and gas were that it is beneath the ground, and you wanted to avoid waste and depressurization by limiting the number of basically straws that go down into the pool. And so the 2005 amendments didn't change anything from the 1963 original legislation.
And Has it been tested in court in New York?
No, hasn't been tested in court in New York. In Texas, there's a Supreme Court case, well, the highest court in Texas, I think it's Coastal Associates versus Garza, and the dissent there said, well, certainly if you're going to direct a wellbore beneath somebody else's property, that's trespass, but the majority basically sidestepped it, and because the oil and gas industry is so important to the economy in Texas, they didn't really want to deal with it. Now, North Dakota, in this case that I cite in my paper that I gave you, the North Dakota court said definitely the oil and gas policy in North Dakota subordinates the rights of individuals to the industry, and this is too important of a resource. But the oil and gas policy, you know, again, it doesn't say what New York's policy says, which is that it does protect the public health or the public rights and individual rights, which is a very big difference.
I mean, I've seen a summary of the compulsory integration law. Does it authorize me to drill horizontally into my neighbor's land?
You know, it's silent on that, but DEC's response to that 4232 question shows that they are going to continue to interpret the law of capture to include all properties within the spacing unit. So they don't come right out and say, well, we're going to allow subsurface trespass, but they say you're going to be, if you're drilling in a spacing unit, you are entitled to all of that resource that's beneath all those properties in the spacing unit, and there's only one way to get that resource from those properties in Marcellus Shale, and that's either to direct the wellbore beneath it or direct the hydrofractures beneath other people's property and take that mineral, because it's non-migratory.
I mean, I would think there is an enormous difference between saying I can drill into my own subterranean land, and if nature has your resources flow into my land, you know, too bad for you. It strikes me as being profoundly different to say I can enter your land as long as I'm 5,000 feet down.
Well, I'm heartened to hear you say that, because I feel the same way, and DEC is not addressing this, and that's why those definitions need to be clarified for unconventional gas and conventional gas, and make sure that conventional gas is migratory gas only, and they restrict spacing units to getting that type of gas and not the non-migratory gas, and that would solve it, I think.
Okay, well, that strikes me as something that, first of all, we in the legislature might want to look at and perhaps clarify or try to, or secondly, that if fracking does go forward, may well be something to litigate.
Yeah, I would also point out there's a terrific law review article about this from the Cornell Law School that was written last year, and it's about it does a terrific job going through the historical nature of the law of capture, and brings up these problems with shale gas and coal bed methane gas and different types of scenarios, and looking at the other states, how they've
If you could email me a citation to that, I would appreciate that.
I'd be happy to.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.